right, so get ready because we're diving deep into Kenneth Burke.
Oh, yeah.
This time,
Diving deep.
we're looking at a rhetoric of motives.
All right.
But specifically, we've got these excerpts from a video lecture that really break down a lot of Burke's ideas about order.
Okay.
And this is where I think things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be talking about how Burke uses this concept of courtship to help us understand dialectic.
Great.
And then he kind of explores some pretty heavy topics like suicide and sacrifice.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it seems like he leaves us contemplating this idea of consubstantiality.
Yeah, it's fascinating how Burke sort of brings all these threads together.
Yeah.
And courtship is such an interesting one because he's not talking about, like romantic courtship in the traditional sense.
Right.
He's using it more as a metaphor, I think, to describe how opposing forces or ideas kind of interact and play off each other.
Okay, so I'm intrigued, but when I hear courtship, I'm thinking, candlelit dinners and like awkward first dates. How does that connect to something as complex as, dialectic?
Well, think about, those classic stories, the knight pursuing the princess.
Right.
It's not necessarily about, achieving that happily ever after.
Okay.
The knight might actually find more satisfaction in the pursuit itself and the
Wow.
challenge, the journey.
So you're saying it's the struggle that motivates him, not just the end goal.
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
Huh.
Yep.
So does that mean like all those villains in like our favorite stories are secretly like enjoying this constant battle with the hero?
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
This kind of perpetual courtship, as Burke describes it,
Right.
where the goal is never actually like fully reached.
Okay.
And he even applies this to religious contexts like prayer.
Wait, prayer. How does courtship fit into that?
Well, imagine certain forms of prayer where the act itself, the
Okay.
communication, the devotion,
Right.
that becomes more important than any specific outcome.
Right.
It's more about this ongoing relationship with a higher power. The act of seeking, not necessarily receiving a tangible answer.
So both the knight and the person deep in prayer are finding meaning in the process itself,
Exactly.
even if the desired outcome never fully materializes.
Yeah, and this is where Burke takes things into some challenging territory
Oh.
when he starts analyzing suicide.
Yeah, that was a pretty heavy turn in the lecture.
Yeah.
I think before we go there, though, it's important to acknowledge that this is a sensitive topic
Absolutely.
and needs to be handled with care.
It's crucial to understand that Burke isn't condoning suicide.
Right.
He's examining it as a rhetorical phenomenon,
Well,
like
sure.
how language can be used to justify or rationalize such actions.
So he's trying to understand the thought process,
Right.
not endorse the act itself,
Exactly.
but he connects it to sacrifice.
Yeah.
How does it even work?
Well, Burke argues that both suicide and sacrifice involve a form of dying,
Okay.
but the motivations behind them can be vastly different.
Right, yeah.
It's not about equating the two, but rather understanding how rhetoric can frame suicide as a type of sacrifice.
So you're saying someone might convince themselves that taking their own life is a selfless act,
Yeah, that's one way it can manifest.
even if that's a distortion of reality.
Absolutely. And this is where critical thinking becomes so crucial.
Right.
We need to be able to recognize potentially harmful rhetoric
Yeah.
and not be swayed by justifications that might sound convincing but lack a solid ethical basis.
So we can't just accept any argument at face value, especially when it comes to something as serious as suicide.
Right.
But how does this manipulation even happen?
Well,
Burke mentions the absurd, and that threw me for a loop.
yeah, the absurd is how Burke describes forces or individuals who promote irrational or harmful ideologies.
Okay, so it's not just about something silly.
No.
It's actually about dangerous ideas that can have real-world consequences.
Precisely, he's talking about ideologies that, while based on faulty reasoning,
Right.
can have very real and damaging consequences.
Okay, so how does the absurd connect to suicide as sacrifice?
Right.
It seems like there's a missing link there.
Yeah, that's a good question.
This is getting pretty intense.
Yeah.
I think we need to take a break.
Okay.
We'll come back and unpack this concept of the absurd a little bit more
Sounds good.
and explore how it ties into everything we've been discussing.
Right.
So the absurd, right? This is where we left off.
Yeah.
How does it connect to suicide as sacrifice?
No, well, you see, the absurd relies on persuasion to twist reality, to kind of frame suicide as a logical or even a noble act. It preys on vulnerabilities, manipulates emotions,
Yeah.
and ultimately aims to shut down critical thinking.
So someone vulnerable to this kind of rhetoric might be convinced that their suicide serves a greater purpose,
Exactly.
even if it's a deeply flawed perspective.
Right.
So I'm starting to see how this ties into Burke's analysis of the id-ego and superego.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, imagine that primal part of us,
Right.
driven by basic desires, is consumed by pain and the urge for self-destruction.
Okay.
The ego, our rational side, might initially resist,
Right.
recognizing the consequences, but the superego, our internal moral compass, can be swayed by the absurd
Right.
to view suicide as a necessary sacrifice.
So it's like a battle within the mind with the absurd whispering justifications that warp our judgment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
How do we even begin to combat this kind of insidious rhetoric?
Well, that's where Burke's concept of consubstantiality comes in.
Okay.
He suggests that even seemingly opposing forces can find common ground.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that even the absurd
Yeah,
can share something with rational thought?
right.
How's that possible?
It boils down to shared principles or values.
Okay.
Even if the methods and goals are drastically different,
Right.
there might be underlying motivations that resonate across seemingly opposing sides.
Okay. I need an example here. How could something like suicide, which is often seen as like a deeply personal act,
Sure.
have any consubstantiality with anything else?
Well, remember those examples from the lecture?
Okay.
Superman versus Doomsday and Hal Jordan Parallax battling the Sun Eater.
Okay.
They might seem like a stretch,
Right.
but they illustrate Burke's point perfectly.
Yeah, those are pretty intense. I mean, superhero battles aren't exactly the first thing that come to mind when I think about suicide and sacrifice.
I understand.
How do they connect?
Well, think about the core motivations.
Okay.
Both the heroes and the villains,
Right.
despite their vastly different methods,
Yeah.
are driven by a desire for the preservation of life.
Okay, so even though Doomsday was incredibly destructive
Yes.
and Hal Jordan as Parallax took kind of a dark path,
Sure.
ultimately they both acted in ways that aimed to protect life in some form.
Exactly. Doomsday's rampage, while devastating, could be seen as a twisted form of natural selection.
Right.
And Hal Jordan, even as Parallax, eventually sacrificed himself to save Earth from the Sun Eater.
So even in these extreme examples of conflict, there's a shared principle
Yes.
connecting these seemingly opposite forces.
That's the power of consubstantiality.
It's like finding unity in the most unexpected places.
Precisely. It helps us see beyond the surface conflict and recognize deeper connections that might otherwise remain hidden.
This consubstantiality thing is really making me rethink how I view conflict and disagreement.
Interesting.
Could it be that there's always some level of common ground, even if it's buried beneath layers of rhetoric and ideology?
It's a powerful idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Burke challenges us to look beyond those simple binaries of good versus evil, encouraging us to seek out those shared principles, those points of connection
Right.
that can lead to a more nuanced understanding of complex issues.
Wow, this deep dive is really making me think.
Good.
We've covered courtship, sacrifice, the absurd, and now consubstantiality.
A lot.
It's amazing how Burke weaves these seemingly disparate ideas together.
Right. Yeah. He was a master at connecting the dots and revealing those hidden patterns in human motivation and behavior.
So I think we need a moment to process all of this.
Yeah. Let's take a break.
When we come back, we'll continue to explore Burke's ideas and see what other insights we can unearth from his rhetoric of motives.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're back
Back.
and ready to kind of wrap up our deep dive into Kenneth Burke.
Okay.
We've been exploring a rhetoric of motives,
Right.
and we've gone through some pretty complex ideas from courtship
Yeah.
to sacrifice, the absurd consubstantiality.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Burke packs a lot in.
And through all of this, I think we've been focusing on this idea of order, right?
Right. Order is kind of that underlying current throughout all of this.
Yeah. And we crave it, right?
Yeah, we want it. We want things to make sense.
We want to make sense of the world and our place in it.
Structure. We need some sort of structure to hold on to.
Right. But then Burke also suggests that this pursuit of order can sometimes lead us in some pretty, unexpected directions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So how do we reconcile that need for order with the fact that life is often unpredictable and messy?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
We seek order and predictability, but we're also drawn to mystery and the unknown.
Right.
Too much order can feel stifling,
Right.
but too much chaos can be overwhelming.
Yeah. It's like we're always trying to find that sweet spot,
Absolutely.
that balance between stability and a little bit of excitement.
And Burke would argue that rhetoric plays a crucial role in this balancing act.
Okay.
language, symbols, narratives.
Right.
They all give us tools to kind of impose order on the world,
Right.
even when we're faced with uncertainty.
So we're using language to almost like build our own little worlds of order,
Yeah, in a way.
to create frameworks that help us understand and navigate life's complexities.
Exactly. And those frameworks can be incredibly helpful.
Right.
They provide a sense of belonging, purpose, identity.
Right.
Think about the groups you belong to,
Yeah.
the beliefs you hold, the stories that resonate with you. They all contribute to your sense of order in the world.
But couldn't those frameworks become too rigid?
Oh, absolutely.
What happens when we cling to our own versions of order so tightly
Yeah.
that we shut out other perspectives?
That's the danger, right? When we become too attached to our own limited view of order,
Right.
we risk becoming closed off to new ideas and experiences.
Right.
We might even become hostile to those who challenge our beliefs.
Right.
It's like wearing blinders
Yeah.
that prevent us from seeing the bigger picture.
So it's like a balancing act. We need order and structure,
Right.
but we also need to stay open to change,
Absolutely.
open to flexibility,
Yeah.
to the possibility that our current understanding might be incomplete.
Right, and that's where Burke's concept of dialectic comes into play.
Right.
Remember, it's all about the interplay of opposing forces,
Uh-huh.
the tension between different ideas and perspectives.
Right.
It's this dynamic back and forth
Yeah.
that pushes us to grow and evolve.
It's not about finding the one right answer.
Yeah,
It's about constantly kind of being in that process of exploration and questioning.
absolutely, a continuous process.
How do we actually put this into practice?
Yeah,
It's easy to talk about dialectic in theory,
sure.
but how can we apply it to our everyday lives?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness,
Okay.
recognizing our own biases
Right.
and preferences for certain types of order.
Uh-huh.
We all have our own unique lenses through which we view the world,
Right.
and it's important to acknowledge that.
So step one is like take off the blinders, become aware of our own ingrained ways of seeing things.
Exactly.
But then how do we actually engage in this dialectic process?
Well, it's about actively seeking out diverse viewpoints.
Right.
Engaging in respectful dialogue with people who hold different beliefs than our own.
Okay.
And most importantly, being willing to change our minds
Right.
when presented with new evidence or a different perspective.
That sounds challenging, especially in today's world where everyone seems to be retreating into their own echo chambers,
Oh, it's definitely not easy.
surrounded by people who already agree with them.
It's a challenge, but it's crucial if we want to grow and learn.
Yeah.
Both individually and as a society.
Right.
Stepping outside our comfort zones and engaging with those who hold different views.
Yeah.
It's essential for progress.
It strikes me that all these concepts we've discussed, courtship, sacrifice, the absurd, consubstantiality, dialectic,
Yeah.
even those religious metaphors, they all circle back to this fundamental human need
Yeah.
to make sense of the world, to create order out of chaos.
I think you're right. Burke's brilliance lies in showing us how these seemingly disparate ideas are interconnected,
Right.
how they illuminate the complexities of human motivation, communication, belief.
This deep dive has been a mind-bending journey for me.
It has been.
It's given me a whole new perspective on how language shapes our understanding of the world
Right.
and how we can use it to navigate the constant push and pull between order and chaos.
It's a constant dance between those two forces.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
If seemingly opposite forces can be united through a shared principle, as Burke suggests, what other examples of this can you find in your own life or in the world around you?
That's a good question.
And what might this tell us about the potential for bridging divides and finding common ground, even in the face of conflict?
It's a powerful question to consider, and one that I hope will stay with you long after this deep dive is over.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning.
Keep seeking those hidden connections that bind us all together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kenneth Burke.
It's been a pleasure.